We are officially in the fantasy football playoffs, so congratulations to all of you who made your playoffs, especially if you clinched that coveted first round bye this week. Well, now your bench spots are very, very important as you try to win your leagues, and beating the waiver wire a week or two early could be the difference between a win and a loss. So let's take a look at some waiver ads this week that could pay off over the next 2 weeks. Starting first with just a collection of potential quarterbacks that could be streamers in week 16 and 17. The big one that I'm looking at first is actually Bryce Young, who I do think is in play this week against Dallas if you need a streamer, but I am more so looking at week 17 against Tampa Bay, who, if you remember, Young put up 300 yards and a touchdown and also rushed for a touchdown on them just a couple weeks ago for nearly 23 fantasy points. I get it. It is still Bryce Young, but he has looked considerably better since reclaiming the starting job and is literally a Xavier Legette drop, an overtime Chuba fumble, and a Kansas City field goal away from being 5-0 over the last 5 games. So pick up Bryce Young now if you need a streaming option for week 17 because he could be the person that delivers the fantasy championship for you at the quarterback position. I'll also mention to not forget about Cooper Rush, who I had in this video last week as well. He gets Carolina this week and then Tampa Bay in week 16. Again, over the past 4 weeks, Rush is the QB 24 in fantasy points per game, which is actually right behind Kyler Murray and Justin Herbert and just ahead of CJ Stroud. He is not a bad play against 2 bad defenses this week and next, and it doesn't hurt when you're throwing to CeeDee Lamb as well. And the last streaming option, I'm just going to throw it as a home run swing and maybe a decent stash in any Superflex leagues out there. If Mason Rudolph were to start again for Tennessee, he could be a solid fantasy quarterback to end the year. In his 3 starts for Will Levis this year, Rudolph put up 9, 19, and 17 fantasy points, throwing for over 240 yards in 2 of those games and accounting for 2 touchdowns in 2 games as well. Now, the 9-point fantasy week was against Buffalo. Nobody really does well against Buffalo this year except Matthew Stafford apparently, but Rudolph did well against the other 2 mediocre defenses that he played, and if he were to start again, he would get Indianapolis in week 16 and Jacksonville in week 17. And with Levis's sprained AC joint that he re-aggravated on Sunday but still painfully played through, it is possible that he injures it more or Tennessee shelves him for whatever reason, leading the way for Rudolph to start once again. All right, now on to some defenses that you can pick up and stash for the fantasy playoffs. I'm just going to basically name every defense that has a good matchup in week 16 and 17, so let's begin. The Arizona Cardinals get Carolina in week 16, Tennessee gets Indianapolis in week 16, and Jacksonville in week 17. Vegas gets Jacksonville in week 16, and then even New Orleans in week 17 is not a bad option. New Orleans gets Vegas in week 17 to kind of flip that on its head. Tampa Bay gets Carolina in week 17, and the Chargers get New England in week 17 too. And if you're really in a pickle, the New York Giants get Atlanta and Indianapolis in week 16 and 17, which kind of feels hit or miss, but depending on how desperate you are at defense, that could be a decent play. And then Indianapolis gets Tennessee and the New York Giants as well to end the year. And it might be possible that whoever has the Buffalo Bills defense drops them this week because they play Detroit, but then they get New England and the New York Jets in week 16 and 17, which could be meh, but also could be good because Buffalo has a really good defense too. So check your waiver wires this week in case someone dropped them. And as I've done now with every single one of these videos, I will be ending once again by advising to stash handcuff running backs, as any handcuffs that become starters over the next month are going to be pivotal pieces in championship runs. And we got a first-hand look at backup running back upside for fantasy football this past weekend with guys like Isaac Orendo, Zach Charbonnet, and Isaiah Davis all playing well for injured running backs. So again, make sure you have the handcuff to your star running back if they are on waivers. I'm talking Blake Corum for Kyron Williams, Ray Davis for James Cook, Trey Benson for James Conner, Sean Tucker for either Buccaneers running back, especially now that Bucky Irving is injured. These guys should all be rostered right now. And on top of them, I will add 3 more names as possibilities to be added if you have the extra bench spots at the running back position. The first is Antonio Gibson, who is with the New England Patriots now, in case you didn't know, and the change of pace / third down running back with Ramondre Stevenson. Now, Stevenson has been a big-time workhorse for the vast majority of the season. He's topped 21 touches in half of his games played this year, including 3 of his last 4 and 4 of his last 6, but Gibson has also gotten enough usage behind Stevenson that he's really not a horrible flex start in a super pinch, especially over the last 2 games with 45 yards on 7 touches and then 62 yards and a touchdown against Miami before their bye week. All I'm saying is that if Ramondre Stevenson were to get hurt, Gibson is not a bad play as the RB1 for New England, especially when they get Buffalo in Week 16, who are currently the third worst team against running backs right now. And I'm sure New England is also going to have to throw more just to keep up with Buffalo's offense. So Gibson could get some dump-offs and screens to raise his floor for fantasy. And then they get the Chargers in Week 17, who are a strong defense against the run, but they have been beaten a lot through the air by Alvin Kamara, Bijan Robinson, Chase Brown, Alexander Mattison even, and the Steelers running backs also combined for 9 receptions against the Chargers, including 5 receptions to Najee Harris himself. So again, if Gibson were to soak up some of these opportunities, it would not only raise his floor for fantasy football, but also potentially his ceiling. Now, the second option is Kendre Miller, who was just activated off the injured reserve this past weekend and immediately turned in 32 yards and a touchdown on 10 carries. Now, I still believe that Kendre Miller is a very solid player. I loved him coming out of college. He just hasn't been able to stay healthy for 2 years in a row now. But it seems like if he's healthy to end the year, that he is the guy to have behind Alvin Kamara just in case of a Kamara injury. And if Kamara were to miss games, the Saints get the Las Vegas Raiders in Week 17 championship week. And this is a Raiders defense who gives up 1, if not even 2 touchdowns to opposing running backs basically every single week. And if somehow Kendre finds himself as the RB1 that week, I think you'd be glad that you stashed him. And the third and final running back to stash is Khalil Herbert, the RB2 in Cincinnati behind Chase Brown. And unlike the other two who could be played in an absolute worst case scenario for your roster, Herbert really does not have that luxury. He is just a straight handcuff. But man, based on what Chase Brown's been doing for the past month or so and the workload that he has received, if Brown were to miss any games moving forward and that role gets passed on to Khalil Herbert, that could be juicy for fantasy football, even against less than ideal matchups for Cincinnati to end the year. So again, now that we're in the playoffs, you need to be using your roster spots wisely. If you're never going to play that wide receiver 5 or 6 that you have on your roster, then cut him for a higher upside player if things fall a certain way, or that handcuff running back that could get a huge role if the starter were to get hurt, or pick up that extra defense a week or 2 in advance. These are the moves that you just can't afford to ignore right now, especially for those of you with buys this week. You need to begin preparing for week 16 and 17 because it's possible, or more likely, it is probable that your opponents are doing the same thing.